Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's lesson, I'm going to be talking about the concept of rooting in Tai Chi, but it also is going to apply to your normal daily activities like walking. This lesson is going to be appropriate for beginners, but if you're a more intermediate or advanced practitioner of Tai Chi, you might also find some benefit because of the particular way I'm going to be discussing the concept, which may be new to people even if you're taking other lessons. So when we talk about rooting or grounding, or staying connected to the ground. This is a common concept that people hear about when they're doing athletics or other sorts of practices that require movement in a controlled fashion. It's also very helpful for our joints to be able to stay rooted to the ground. We're going to talk about it in the context of the Tai Chi movements of Parting the Wild Horse's Mane and Crane Cools Its Wings, which I covered in the first two videos on the Tai Chi Yang style form. So if you've watched those two videos, you're going to be able to apply this concept to practicing those two Tai Chi techniques, Parting the Wild Horse's Mane and Crane Cools Its Wings. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Todd Martin. I'm a family medicine practitioner and Tai Chi practitioner, and I am the creator of both the Walking Code and the Tai Chi Code. So let's get into the concept of rooting. Now, if you're a Tai Chi practitioner, especially if you've participated in forums or other places where people ask questions, you may be familiar with the concept of always avoiding being double weighted. And there's always a lot of debate about what that means. But if we apply the Tai Chi code to this idea, it's going to be much more clear, and I'm going to explain how that works today. When we're talking about rooting, what we're talking about is the control of our lower abdominal muscles that roots one leg to the ground or the other. So when we are moving fluidly, we only have one leg rooted to the ground. Both legs can be on the ground, but one leg is where the root is. And we can move around that one leg like a tether ball moving around the pole, connected by a string, and that string is our leg. So in this case, I'm going to root my right leg, and I can flow around the right leg. People could try to push me over. If I'm rooted on that right leg, it's not going to pop up off the ground. I do not root on both legs at the same time, because then there is no way for me to pivot around a single axis of rotation, which is what we need if we're going to move in a balanced fashion. So how are we physically rooting to the ground? We're using the lower abdominal muscles. So the lower abs are functioning on both sides of the body, but only one side of the body at a time. The lower abs on the right turn the pelvis back to the right. Pelvis and lumbar spine get pulled back to the right by the right lower abs, and at the same time, those lower abs tuck the pelvis on the right. So if I disengage my lower abs completely on both sides, you'd have a posture that looks like this. When we stand correctly, we engage one side of the lower abs by tucking them under. This is pulling up on our lumbar spine, tilting the pelvis in a posterior direction until it gets to this neutral position. So we do that on one side at a time. So I'm not going to root both my right leg and my left leg at the same time. If I try to tuck the left leg using the lower abs on the left while keeping the lower abs on the right activated, I'm going to tuck under, and this is what's going to happen. I'm going to start to collapse forward because I am rooting both at the same time or double weighting. So that is what we always want to avoid, double weighting. Even if I step out here onto my right foot, I'm rooted on my left. Even as I shift my weight, I'm keeping the root on the left leg. So visually, my center of gravity is between the 2 feet, but I have only a root on the left. You can't see it visually, only you can only know it if you're doing it yourself. So I know my root is on the left, and if I transfer the root over to the right, my left leg is going to come up off the ground as I release the root from that side and transfer it over to the other side. So let's apply this to the movement of parting the wild horse's mane, beginning from this motion here, the very final movement. When we're back in this position, prior to executing the final movement, I have my root on the right leg. So I'm tucked under with the lower abs, keeping the pelvis in a neutral position on the right. The pelvis on the left side is not tucked. It is not in a tucked position. I only am tucked on the right. When I shift into parting the wild horse's mane, I'm going to transfer the root from the right to the left, which means the tuck is going to go from the right to the left, and it's going to untuck on the right. So it essentially releases the tuck on one side while gaining the tuck on the other side. And it happens in a gradual process. 100%, 0%, 50%, 50%, 0%, 100%. But it's a gradual transfer of the root from one side to the other. You can think of it as releasing the tuck on one side and adding the tuck on the other side, or you can think of it as rotating our belly button, which is reflecting the lower ab rotation. So I can turn the belly button from right to left or left to right. The tuck is going to go along with that rotation. You can either think about tucking or turning, but they're both going to achieve the same final result. So that is going to control the root on the right or the root on the left. When we pivot back to transition to the next parting the wild horse's mane, we're actually transferring the root back to the right. So from here, I'm tucked on the left, and when I shift back and pivot, I'm going to tuck on the right and release the tuck on the left. And then as I shift forward, I'm going to release the tuck on the right and add back the tuck on the left. So now I am rooted on the left. I have no root on the right. Then I wind out, which uses my upper waist rotation, and then I step out onto the heel. And as I step out onto the heel, I'm changing the tuck back from left to right. It's very difficult to visualize, but I'll show it in this way, which might be a little more clear. You can see here I'm tucked on the left, keeping my pelvis in a neutral position. If I release that tuck like this, you can see my body start to pitch forward and my butt to start going back that way. So now I want to reestablish the tuck, but on the right side, and that is what's going to bring the foot out onto the heel. But we're not going to do it one movement at a time. We're going to gradually release the root on the left as we gain the root on the right, all in one fell swoop. So that is the concept of rooting. This is really important, and for me, it's one of the most important concepts for people studying Tai Chi, because this is the concept that needs to translate to your daily movements. Because when we are walking down the street, we have to change our root from one leg to the other leg. And then we place the heel, and then we transfer the root back to the original leg, and so forth. We can't be double rooted, and we also don't want to be missing the root completely, because if we miss the root completely, we either stand like this with a very bad posture, or we substitute the root for the glute, meaning we use our glutes to push the body back up into a pseudo-normal posture that still does not have a root. My lower abs are not activated. I've just created a big arch in my back here by activating the glutes to substitute for the root. I need to relax the glute and put in the root, which comes from the lower abs. We're constantly changing the root up. And the other variable that determines where the whole body goes is what we do with the upper waist muscles as we change the root. When we're shifting our root onto one leg or away from the other leg, we have two choices. We can either turn our upper body away from the side that is being rooted, like I just did there, or if I'm pivoting to do Pardon the Wild Horse's mane, I turn my upper body away from where I'm putting the root. Then I turn the upper body back towards the rooted side. The alternative would be turning the upper body towards the root as I change the weight, and that's what's going to happen. If I turn the upper body towards the same side that I'm rooting right away, my rear leg is going to collect up to the side of my forward leg all in one movement because all of the core waist energy is turning in the same direction. When I turn the upper waist away from the root, that is giving some essentially backward energy on the side of this rear leg here, keeping that leg stuck to the ground until I remove it by turning the upper waist towards the forward leg. So that's how the root works. We can see that in Parting the Wild Horse's mane. And then I'm going to show you how the root works when we are doing the transition from Parting the Wild Horse's mane to Crane Cools Its Wings. So we just did Parting the Wild Horse's mane. My root is on the left now. So all I have to do to collect the weight is turn the upper body towards the left, and the rear leg comes off the ground automatically because there was no root on it. Now I'm going to shift back. As I shift back, I have to turn the root back to the right. So I'm turning my belly button back to the right. But I'm turning the upper waist to the left. That keeps my body facing forward. As the root goes back to the right, to get into empty stance, now I turn the upper waist back to the right, and that brings me into empty stance where the upper waist and lower waist are turning towards the same leg. This, in the Tai Chi code, I believe is what happens when we're creating central equilibrium, which is one of the 5 steps or stepping patterns in Tai Chi. Central equilibrium. That, in all of the movements we do in Tai Chi, occurs when the upper waist and lower waist are turning toward the standing leg. It helps keep our balance in a very stable position. So that's what we're doing in Crane Cools Its Wings, getting back to that position. Let's do this again. I turn the upper waist to do the half step up. I shift back, turning my belly button back to the right. Then I turn the upper waist to the right to get into empty stance. And then I turn the upper waist to the left to complete Crane Cools Its Wings. The root or the tuck is still on the right. I did not need to change it. So that's Crane Cools Its Wings. You can see there how we're transitioning the root from one side to the other. It's a very dynamic action of the lower abs, always keeping a tucking action going and a rotational action going on the side where you want your weight. It doesn't matter if you're standing on one leg like this, where it's very obvious where the weight is, or if you're standing like this, where my weight is on one leg or the other, and only the person doing it's going to be able to see that. Or if you're standing in a bow stance, you can be a bow stance with your root on the right, the rear leg, or you can be in a bow stance with your root on the left. It all depends on how you got into the position. You can apply this concept to every movement you do in Tai Chi, and you can apply this concept to every movement you do when you're walking around doing your normal daily activities. It's going to help you transfer your weight in a smooth and continuous fashion and prevent you from crashing into your heel when you're walking. So if you do that, controlling your change of route or change of weight, as the other way we can describe that, you're going to be able to move with an aligned spine, aligned joints in your lower body, and lower impact on those joints in the lower body, so they will stay healthy over the course of your lifetime and reduce your risk of wear and tear arthritis. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, and check out this next video right here.